I never imagined that after 4 decades of building our life in London, Robert and I would enter our 60s without a roof over our heads, thrown away by the very children we raised with our own hands. Those words still taste bitter on my tongue, even now. They carry the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights, the echo of doors slammed in our faces, and the hollow silence that replaced what was once the warm laughter of a family we built from nothing. My name is Margaret Dawson. I am 60 years old, and I am telling you this story not for pity, not for sympathy, but because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear it. Perhaps you have parents who call and you never answer. Perhaps you have a mother waiting by a window, wondering why her children stop coming home. Perhaps you are a parent yourself, watching your little ones grow, believing with all your heart that love guarantees loyalty. I believed that once too. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the days when hope was all Robert and I had, and somehow, that was enough. Robert and I met in 1983, in a cramped little cafe on Tottenham Court Road. I was working as a waitress, serving tea to businessmen who never looked at my face, only at their newspapers. Robert came in one Tuesday afternoon, soaked from the rain, his coat dripping onto the checkered floor. He ordered a cup of black coffee and a slice of Victoria sponge, and when I brought it to him, he looked directly into my eyes and smiled. "Thank you," he said. Just 2 words. But the way he said them, like he meant it, like I was a person and not just a pair of hands carrying plates, it stayed with me. He came back every Tuesday after that. We talked about little things at first. The weather, the rising cost of bus fares, the way London seemed to swallow people whole if they weren't careful. He worked at a printing factory in Hackney, operating machines that hummed and groaned through the night. His hands were always stained with ink, his fingernails permanently darkened. But those hands were gentle when they held mine for the first time, outside that cafe, on a cold December evening when the Christmas lights twinkled above us like promises we dared to believe. We married in the spring of 1985. A small ceremony at the registry office, with only a handful of friends and my cousin Linda, who traveled down from Sheffield. We couldn't afford a proper wedding. We couldn't afford much of anything back then. Our first flat was a single room in Brixton, with a shared bathroom down the hall and a hot plate that barely worked. The walls were thin enough that we could hear our neighbors arguing, their voices rising and falling like a discordant symphony of other people's troubles. But we were happy. God, we were happy. Robert would come home after his night shifts, his body exhausted, his eyes heavy with fatigue, but he always kissed me before collapsing into our narrow bed. I would lie beside him, listening to his breathing slow into sleep, and I would think, this is enough. This man, this room, this life we are building together, this is enough. I took on extra shifts at the cafe. Robert picked up weekend work at a warehouse near King's Cross, loading and unloading trucks until his back screamed for mercy. We saved every penny we could spare, tucking notes into a tin box we kept under the floorboards. Our dream was simple: a proper home, a family, a life where our children would never know the kind of hunger we had known. Our first child, Daniel, was born in 1987. I remember holding him for the first time, this tiny creature with Robert's dark hair and my mother's nose. He was so small, so fragile, so utterly dependent on us for everything. I wept when they placed him in my arms, not from pain, but from the overwhelming realization that my heart had just expanded to make room for a love I didn't know I was capable of feeling. Sarah came 2 years later, in 1989. A spring baby with curious eyes and a laugh that sounded like bells ringing. Robert cried when he held her, actual tears streaming down his weathered face, and he whispered to her that he would give her the world. We meant every promise we made to those children, every single one. The years that followed were hard in ways I struggle to describe. Raising 2 children in London on factory wages and waitress tips felt like trying to hold water in cupped hands no matter how tightly we clasped. Something always slipped through. I remember nights when Robert and I would skip dinner, telling the children we had eaten earlier, just so there would be enough food on their plates. I remember Daniel's first day of school, how I walked him to the gates wearing shoes with holes in the soles, my feet blistered and bleeding by the time I got home. I remember Sarah falling ill with pneumonia when she was 4, and how I sold my mother's wedding ring, the only thing she had left me to pay for the medicine that saved her life. We never told the children about these sacrifices. What parent does? You do what must be done. You smile through the exhaustion. You pretend that everything is fine, that the bills stacking up on the kitchen counter are just paper, that the constant gnawing worry in your stomach is just hunger, nothing more. But we climbed. Slowly, painfully, we climbed. By 1995, we had saved enough for a deposit on a small terraced house in Lewisham. 3 bedrooms, a garden the size of a postage stamp, and a kitchen where I could finally cook proper meals for my family. The day we got the keys, Robert lifted me off my feet and spun me around in the empty living room, both of us laughing like children ourselves. "We did it, Maggie," he said, his voice cracking. "We actually did it. That house became everything to us. We painted the walls ourselves, chose wallpaper patterns together, spent weekends at car boot sales looking for furniture we could afford. Daniel and Sarah grew up in those rooms. They took their first steps on those creaky floorboards. They measured their heights against the kitchen doorframe, marking their growth with pencil lines that we promised never to paint over. I can still see those pencil lines if I close my eyes. I can still trace them with my finger in my memory. Each mark a moment. Each moment a treasure I didn't know I would one day lose. Daniel was always the serious one. Even as a boy, he carried a weight behind his eyes, a quiet intensity that made teachers call him mature for his age. He excelled at school, bringing home report cards that made Robert burst with pride. He was going to be something, we told ourselves. He was going to break the cycle, escape the life of factory floors and exhausted bodies that had defined our existence. Sarah was different, lighter, freer, quicker to laugh, but also quicker to anger. She inherited my mother's stubbornness and my grandmother's sharp tongue. She fought with us constantly during her teenage years, slamming doors and screaming that we didn't understand her, that we were suffocating her with our expectations. But even in her worst moments, she would crawl into my bed at night, curl against my side, and whisper apologies that smelled like the strawberry shampoo she insisted on using. We gave them everything we could. School uniforms pressed and ready each morning. Birthday parties with cakes I stayed up all night baking. Summer holidays at the seaside, saving for months just to afford 3 days in a cramped caravan in Margate. We weren't wealthy. We were never wealthy. But we loved them with every fiber of our being, and we believed foolishly, perhaps that love was enough. Daniel went to university, the first in our family. I remember the day his acceptance letter arrived, how we gathered around the kitchen table, hands trembling as he opened the envelope. When he read the words aloud, "We are pleased to offer you a place." Robert wept openly, unashamed. All those night shifts, all that ink-stained exhaustion, had led to this moment. His son was going to have the life he never could. Sarah followed a different path. She met a man named Marcus when she was 19, a smooth-talking sales representative with a company car and a confident smile. She moved in with him within months, married him within a year. We had our doubts about Marcus. There was something hollow behind his charm, something that made Robert uncomfortable, but we said nothing. What parent interferes with their child's happiness? We smiled at the wedding, posed for photographs, and prayed we were wrong about the shadows we glimpsed in our son-in-law's eyes. The distance began so gradually that we didn't notice it at first. A missed Sunday dinner here, an unanswered phone call there. The spaces between visits grew longer, the conversations shorter. Daniel was busy with his career as solicitor now, with a flat in Canary Wharf and a girlfriend named Victoria who wore designer clothes and looked at us like we were something to be tolerated. Sarah was consumed by her marriage, by the children that came in quick succession, by the life Marcus had built around her like a gilded cage. We told ourselves it was normal. Children grow up. They have their own lives. They don't need their parents hovering over them every moment. But normal shouldn't feel like abandonment. I remember the Christmas of 2015 with painful clarity. We had invited both children for dinner, spent weeks preparing, saved money for a proper turkey and all the trimmings. The house was decorated, the table set, the fire crackling in the hearth. Robert had even found a bottle of champagne, real champagne, not the sparkling wine we usually settled for. Daniel canceled the morning of. A work emergency, he said. Victoria's family had invited them skiing, he said. Maybe next year. Sarah arrived 3 hours late, Marcus in tow, their children glued to their tablets, barely acknowledging us. They stayed for 45 minutes. 45 minutes, after we had spent weeks preparing. Marcus complained about the food. Sarah checked her phone constantly. And when they left, she didn't hug me goodbye. She just waved from the car window as Marcus pulled away, already absorbed in some argument they were having. I stood in the doorway, watching their taillights disappear into the night, and I felt something crack inside me. Not break, not yet. Just crack. A fissure in the foundation of everything I believed about family. Robert found me crying in the kitchen later that night, surrounded by untouched food and empty chairs. He held me without speaking, his arms the only anchor I had left. We didn't talk about what had happened. What was there to say? Our children had become strangers who shared our blood, nothing more. The real nightmare began in 2019. Robert retired from the factory that year, his body finally surrendering to decades of hard labor. His back was ruined, his knees shot, his hands trembling with the early signs of Parkinson's. We had our pensions modest, barely enough, but we had the house. We had each other. We thought we could manage. Then the bills started arriving. The roof needed repair. The boiler gave out. The council taxes kept rising. We hadn't saved enough, how could we? When every spare penny had gone toward our children's education, their weddings, their deposits for flats they never invited us to visit, our savings dwindled, then disappeared. I called Daniel first, explained our situation calmly, carefully, trying not to sound desperate even though desperation was clawing at my throat. I asked if he could help, just a small loan, just enough to get us through until we figured something out. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought the connection had dropped. "Mum," he finally said, his voice cold in a way I had never heard before. "I can't keep bailing you and Dad out. You should have planned better. Victoria and I have our own responsibilities now. Bailing us out." We had never asked him for anything. Not once in his entire life. But I didn't argue. I couldn't. The words lodged in my throat like broken glass. I called Sarah next. The conversation was worse. "Marcus says we can't be giving money to family," she said, her voice distant, rehearsed. "It sets a bad precedent. You understand, Mum?" No, I didn't understand. I didn't understand any of it. The letter arrived in September of 2021. It was from a solicitor Daniel's firm, I later learned. Cold, clinical language informing us that legal proceedings had been initiated to force the sale of the family home. Something about inheritance rights, about protecting assets, about ensuring fair distribution of property. Robert's name was on the deed alongside mine. Our children's names were there too. We had added them years ago, on their advice, as a gesture of trust and family unity. We thought we were being generous, forward-thinking. We thought we were showing them that everything we had built was theirs as much as ours. They used that trust against us. The legal battle lasted 8 months. 8 months of court appearances and lawyers' fees we couldn't afford. 8 months of watching Daniel sit across the courtroom in his expensive suit, refusing to meet my eyes. 8 months of Sarah's conspicuous absence, her silence louder than any words could be. We lost. The house was sold. The proceeds were divided. After legal fees and debts were settled, Robert and I were left with almost nothing, and nowhere to go. I remember the day we had to leave. The removal van had already gone, not that there was much to remove. Most of our belongings had been sold or donated. The accumulated possessions of 40 years reduced to a few suitcases and boxes that now sat on the pavement outside what had been our home. Robert stood in the empty living room, staring at the kitchen doorframe where those pencil lines had marked our children's growth. Someone had painted over them. The new owners, perhaps, or the estate agents. It didn't matter. They were gone now, like everything else. "Robert," I said softly, touching his arm. "We need to go." He didn't respond. Just kept staring at that doorframe, tears streaming silently down his face, his body trembling in a way that had nothing to do with his Parkinson's. I had never seen my husband truly broken before that moment. He had always been the strong one, the steady one, the one who held our family together through every storm. But standing in that empty room, watching our children's legacy being erased, something in him finally shattered. And something in me shattered with it. Our first night on the streets of London, I didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. We had found a spot near Waterloo Bridge, tucked behind some concrete barriers where the wind was slightly less cruel. Robert had managed to get some cardboard from a nearby shop, something to lie on, to separate our bodies from the cold pavement that seemed to leach the warmth from our bones. The sounds of the city were different down there. Louder somehow. The rumble of traffic, the distant wail of sirens, the footsteps of people passing by without a glance in our direction. We had become invisible, Robert and I. Invisible and disposable. I lay there, staring up at the underbelly of the bridge, and I thought about all the nights I had tucked Daniel and Sarah into bed. the bedtime stories I had read, the night lights I had left on to chase away their fears. I had spent so many years protecting them from the dark, and now here I was 60 years old, swallowed by a darkness I couldn't have imagined. "Are you awake?" Robert's voice barely a whisper. "Yes. I'm sorry, Maggie." I turned to look at him, this man I had loved for 40 years, his face gaunt and gray in the dim light filtering down from the street lamps above. "What could you possibly be sorry for?" "I should have seen it coming. Should have done something different. Should have." "Don't." I reached for his hand, found it cold despite the gloves he was wearing. "This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." "Whose fault is it then?" I didn't answer. I couldn't answer, because the truth was too painful to speak aloud. The truth was that our own children had done this to us. The babies I had carried in my body, nursed at my breast, loved with every particle of my being, they had thrown us away like rubbish. That first night I prayed. Not to God, exactly, my faith had always been shaky, more cultural habit than genuine belief. But I prayed to something, to the universe, to whatever force might be listening. "Please," I begged. "Please let this be a nightmare I'm going to wake from. Please let me open my eyes and find myself in my own bed, in my own house, with my children calling to wish me good morning." But morning came, cold and gray and indifferent, and nothing had changed. The weeks blurred together after that. We learned the rhythms of homeless life in London, which shelters had space, which churches offered hot meals, which parks were safe enough to rest in during the day. We learned to avoid certain streets after dark, where the desperate and the dangerous congregated. We learned to recognize the blank stares of passers-by who had perfected the art of looking through us rather than at us. Robert's health deteriorated rapidly. The Parkinson's, the cold, the lack of proper medication, it all took its toll. His tremors worsened. His balance became unreliable. Some mornings he couldn't stand without my help, his muscles stiff and uncooperative after a night on the hard ground. I watched my husband, this proud man who had worked his entire life, struggle to feed himself with shaking hands. I watched him shuffle to public toilets, leaning on walls for support, and return with tears of humiliation in his eyes. I watched the light fade from him, a little more each day, and I felt a rage building inside me that threatened to consume everything. How dare they? How dare our children do this to us? I thought about calling them. So many times I thought about it. There was a phone at the shelter we sometimes stayed at, available for residents to use. I would stand near it, my hand hovering over the receiver, Daniel's number running through my head like a song I couldn't forget. But what would I say? What words could possibly bridge the chasm they had created? They knew where we were. They knew what had happened. They had made their choice, and their choice was to let us suffer. I didn't make the call. Not once. Pride, perhaps. Or maybe something deeper, a recognition that hearing their voices would break me in ways I couldn't afford to be broken. I had to stay strong for Robert. I had to keep going. There was a woman at one of the shelters, a volunteer named Helen, who showed us kindness that felt almost unbearable. She was maybe 40, with gentle eyes and a soft Scottish accent that reminded me of my grandmother. She brought us extra blankets when the nights were especially cold. She sat with Robert while I showered, making sure he didn't fall. She listened when I needed to talk, never judging, never offering empty platitudes. "You remind me of my own mum," she told me one evening. "She passed last year. Cancer. But the way you speak, the way you carry yourself, there's something similar." "I'm sorry about your mother," I said. "Thank you." She paused, her gaze growing distant. "I visit her grave every Sunday. Bring her flowers. Tell her about my week. Silly, maybe. But it makes me feel closer to her." "That's not silly. That's love." Helen nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something, Margaret? About your children?" I tensed. I always tensed when the subject came up. "You can ask. Do you hate them?" The question hung between us, heavy and unavoidable. I thought about it for a long time before answering. "I should," I finally said. "God knows I should. After everything they've done, hatred would be justified, would be deserved." I stopped, swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "But I can't. I've tried. Believe me, I've tried. But when I close my eyes, I don't see the adults who abandoned us. I see my babies. I see Daniel's first smile, Sarah's first steps. I see the children who ran to me when they were scared, who believed I could fix anything, who loved me with the simple, unconditional love that only children can give." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't bother wiping them away. Those children are gone, I continued. The people who replaced them, I don't recognize them. But somewhere, buried deep inside them, those children still exist. And I can't hate them. I can only mourn what they became. Helen reached out and took my hand, squeezing gently. You're a remarkable woman, Margaret Dawson. I'm just a mother, I said. That's all I ever was. The hardest night came in February. It had been raining for 3 days straight, the kind of cold, relentless rain that seeps into your bones and makes you forget what warmth feels like. The shelter was full. Every church hall and community center we tried was at capacity. The streets were crawling with people like us, all searching for the same thing. Somewhere, anywhere, to escape the wet and the cold. We found ourselves under a railway bridge near London Bridge, the sound of trains rumbling overhead every few minutes. There were others there too, a young couple huddled together. An old man with a shopping trolley full of his belongings. A woman talking quietly to herself in the corner. We nodded at each other, the silent acknowledgement of shared suffering, but spoke little. What was there to say? Robert couldn't stop coughing. Deep, racking coughs that shook his entire frame and left him gasping for breath. His forehead was burning when I touched it, his eyes glassy and unfocused. We need to get you to hospital, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. No, he shook his head weakly. No hospital. They'll just send us back out. When they're done. Robert, please. I'm fine, Maggie. Just need to rest. But he wasn't fine. I knew he wasn't fine. And I knew with a terrible certainty that if I didn't get him help soon, I was going to lose him. The rain pounded down. The trains roared overhead. And I sat there, holding my husband's burning hand, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. That was the moment I nearly broke completely. I felt it rising inside me, the despair, the grief, the accumulated weight of every loss and betrayal and disappointment. It was going to swallow me whole. I was going to scream, to wail, to curse the God I barely believed in, and the children who had done this to us. But then Robert stirred. His eyes opened, found mine. Remember, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. Remember Margate? The caravan. And suddenly I did. I remembered. That tiny caravan, cramped and slightly damp, with Daniel and Sarah bouncing on the beds while Robert pretended to be a monster chasing them. I remembered the way Sarah had squealed with terrified delight, the way Daniel had tried to protect his little sister, the way Robert had finally collapsed in a heap, the children piling on top of him, all of them laughing until they couldn't breathe. I remember, I said. That was good. That was real. Yes, I agreed, tears mixing with rain on my cheeks. That was real. We had that, Maggie. Whatever happens, we had that. I leaned down and kissed his forehead, tasting fever and fear. We still have it, I whispered. They can't take our memories. They can't take what we were. He smiled, then a pale ghost of his former smile, but real nonetheless. And somehow, impossibly, we made it through that night. A volunteer found us the next morning. A young man from a homeless outreach program, making his rounds in the aftermath of the storm. He took one look at Robert and called an ambulance immediately. Robert spent 2 weeks in hospital. Pneumonia, they said. Severe. He was lucky to be alive. I sat by his bed every day, holding his hand, watching the machines beep and were around us. The nurses were kind. The doctors were efficient. No one asked too many questions about how an elderly couple had ended up in this situation. Perhaps they didn't want to know. Perhaps they had seen it too many times before. During those 2 weeks, I had a lot of time to think, to remember, to grieve. I thought about the birthday parties I had thrown, the late nights spent sewing Halloween costumes because we couldn't afford to buy them, the school plays I had attended, beaming with pride as Daniel recited his lines or Sarah danced across the stage. I thought about all the arguments, the teenage rebellion, the slammed doors, the hurtful words that children throw at their parents without understanding the weight they carry. I had forgiven all of it. Every sharp word, every moment of disrespect, every time they had taken our love for granted. That was what parents did. That was what love meant. But this abandonment, this cruelty, this calculated destruction of everything we had built, how do you forgive something that feels unforgivable? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. Robert recovered slowly. The hospital social worker helped us find temporary accommodation, a room in supported housing for older adults at risk of homelessness. It wasn't much. A single room with 2 narrow beds, a small kitchenette, a shared bathroom down the hall. But it was warm. It was dry. It was a place where we could close a door and be alone together. We have been here for 7 months now. The housing association is working to find us something more permanent, but the waiting lists are long and the demand is high. For now, we exist in this limbo, no longer sleeping on streets, but not truly home either. Robert still struggles. His Parkinson's has advanced. He walks with a frame now, moves slowly, speaks softly. Some days he forgets things, names, dates, whether he has taken his medication. The disease is stealing him from me, piece by piece, and there is nothing I can do but love him through it. We don't talk about the children often. It hurts too much. But sometimes, late at night, when neither of us can sleep, we share fragments of memory. Do you remember when Daniel learned to ride a bike? Do you remember Sarah's first nativity play? How she forgot her lines and just stood there smiling. Do you remember? Do you remember? Do you remember? The memories are all we have left of the family we thought we were building. Last week, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but the return address made my heart stop. Sarah's address. I hadn't seen it in years, but I recognized it immediately, burned into my memory like a brand. My hands shook as I opened it. Robert was sleeping, so I read it alone, standing by the window, watching pigeons gather on the ledge outside. It wasn't from Sarah. It was from her daughter, Emily. My granddaughter. 15 years old now, though I hadn't seen her since she was 9. Dear Grandma, she wrote. I know Mom doesn't want me writing to you, but I found out what happened. I overheard Mom and Dad talking. I know about the house and the court case and everything. I think what they did was wrong. I think it was really wrong. I don't understand why they would hurt you like that. I remember you. I remember coming to your house for Christmas when I was little. I remember the cookies you used to make, the ones shaped like stars. I remember Grandpa lifting me up to put the angel on the tree. Those are some of my best memories. I'm sorry for what happened. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. I hope you're okay. I hope Grandpa is okay. I love you both. Emily. I read that letter 17 times. I memorized every word, every loop of her handwriting, every tiny imperfection in the paper. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed and wept, not from sadness for once, but from something else. Something that felt almost like hope. Emily remembered. Emily cared. Emily understood, in her 15-year-old way, that what had been done to us was wrong. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It didn't undo a single moment of suffering or repair a single fracture in our broken family. But it was something. A tiny thread connecting me to the life I had lost. A reminder that love, once given, is never entirely gone. I am writing this now not because I expect anything to change. I am 60 years old, and I have learned that life rarely offers the redemption we crave. The happy endings of films and novels, they are not for people like Robert and me. Our ending, whatever it turns out to be, will likely be quiet and unremarkable. 2 old people who were loved, then abandoned, then forgotten by the world. But I am writing because I need to say something. To someone, to anyone who might be listening. If you are reading this and you have parents who are aging, who are struggling, who are reaching out to you with trembling hands and uncertain voices, please, I am begging you, do not turn away. Do not let pride or resentment or the petty grievances of the past blind you to their humanity. They are not perfect. No parent is. They made mistakes, said things they regret, failed you in ways both large and small. But they loved you. They loved you with a ferocity you cannot understand until you have children of your own. They walked floors when you were sick, sacrificed meals when money was short, held you when nightmares woke you screaming. They gave you life, and then they spent their lives trying to make yours better. They deserve better than cold pavement and empty promises. If you are reading this and you have not spoken to your parents in months, in years, make the call. Today. Right now. Tell them you love them. Tell them you are sorry for the distance, for the silence, for the walls you have built between you. It is not too late. It is never too late until it is. And if you are reading this and you are a parent yourself, watching your children grow, pouring your heart into their futures, know this. Love is not a contract. Love does not come with guarantees. You can do everything right, give everything you have, sacrifice your own dreams for theirs, and still end up alone. Still end up abandoned. Still end up wondering where it all went wrong. But love them anyway. Love them fiercely, completely, without reservation. Because that love is its own reward. That love is the only thing that cannot be taken from you, no matter what happens. Your children may grow cold. They may forget. They may break your heart in ways you cannot imagine. But the love you gave them, that is eternal. That is sacred. That is the one thing in this uncertain world that has any real meaning. Robert is awake now. I can hear him stirring in the other bed, making the small sounds of an old man emerging from sleep. In a few minutes, I will help him up. I will steady him as he shuffles to the bathroom. I will make him tea and toast, and we will sit together by the window, watching the world go by without us. It is not the life we imagined for ourselves. It is not the golden years we worked so hard to earn. But it is ours. And we are together. And somehow, even after everything, that is enough. Outside, the sun is rising over London. The city that swallowed us, that chewed us up and spat us out, looks almost beautiful in this early morning light. The buildings gleam. The streets are quiet. Somewhere out there, our children are waking up in their comfortable homes, beginning their comfortable lives, perhaps not sparing a single thought for the parents they discarded. I would be lying if I said it doesn't still hurt. The wound is deep, and it will never fully heal. Some nights I still wake gasping, the phantom weight of abandonment crushing my chest. Some days I still catch myself reaching for the phone, wanting to hear Sarah's voice, wanting to tell Daniel about something I read in the newspaper. Old habits die hard. Old love dies harder. But I have learned something in these months on the streets and in temporary housing. I have learned that suffering, as terrible as it is, cannot destroy the core of who you are. I am still Margaret Dawson. I am still a wife, a mother, a grandmother. I still love passionately, forgive reluctantly, hope stubbornly. They could not take that from me. They could not take any of it. And Robert, my anchor, my love, he is still here. Diminished, perhaps. Fragile, certainly. But here, breathing, fighting, refusing to surrender. We will face whatever comes next together, as we have faced everything for the past 40 years. Hand in hand, heart to heart. Two imperfect people who somehow found each other in this vast and indifferent city, and somehow stayed found. That is our story. Not the ending we hoped for. Not the legacy we dreamed of leaving. But ours nonetheless. And if you have heard it, truly heard it, then perhaps it was worth telling. The kettle is whistling. Robert is calling my name. The sun continues its slow climb over London's skyline, painting the clouds in shades of gold and pink. I fold Emily's letter carefully, tuck it into my pocket where I can feel it against my heart. Then I go to my husband, take his hand, and help him face another day. It is enough. It has to be enough. This is the story of Margaret and Robert Dawson. Two ordinary people who built an extraordinary love. Two parents who gave everything and lost nearly all. Two human beings who discovered that in the end, when all else is stripped away, what remains is simply this: the choice to keep loving, even when love has betrayed you. The choice to keep hoping, even when hope seems foolish. The choice to keep living, one breath at a time, one sunrise at a time, one moment of stubborn, beautiful, heartbreaking grace at a time. If this story has touched you, let it change you. Call your parents. Forgive your children. Love the people in your life while they are still here to receive it. Tomorrow is promised to no one. But today is a gift we can still give.